So yeah, that is exciting. I really am excited about that. And Winnie lied a little bit because she said it was for the women. And I don't know if you noticed how she snuck that in, that our brothers are going to serve us. That's because men, we're going to serve that this morning. And so we want everybody to put that aside, December 20th, for that Christmas breakfast, brunch, whatever you want to call it, 10 o'clock. It's going to be a very great day. Going to be a lot of fun. Ladies are going to have a great time, but more importantly, the message of Jesus Christ is going to be preached and heard, and we expect God to move that morning. So really just, like what he said, really be in prayer about who you should invite. Family, friends, neighbors. I mean, this is a great time to get somebody in the church building during Christmas. And I know it's real close to Christmas, but, Saturday morning, we can do it. So, all right? Keep doing that. It is almost Christmas. We got lots of shoe boxes up here. You're going to bring your shoe boxes next week. So if you haven't packed a shoebox yet, I pray that you pack a shoebox this week. And my challenge every year is if you packed one shoebox last year, pack two this year. Pack one more at least. And as the little boy last week, if you were here, said, the most important thing to go into that box is prayer. So I really hope that you're praying this week as you're packing that shoebox, as you're looking over it. So. We are in the book of John. So if you have your Bibles with you, I'm going to ask you to open up to the book of John, chapter 18. And I think it's extremely appropriate that as we've been preaching through the book of John, and as we kind of come to this end, that we're coming toward the end of it at Christmas time. Now, you might think, well, if it was really great, we would come to the end of John talking about the crucifixion of Jesus Christ at Easter time. And that would be good too. But I think it's appropriate because, Christmas is not about just Emmanuel, God with us, Jesus coming. I mean, that is amazing to me. That God would dwell with us. Right? But Jesus didn't come to be born only. Jesus came to die. He came to die. So I think even as we enter into the Christmas season, as we have this picture of Jesus Christ going to the cross for one reason and one reason only, and that is because you and I are great sinners and in need of a Savior. And so Jesus goes to the cross for us. And so that's what we're looking at. We're in that last, really not even 24 hours of Jesus' life, within the last 6 to 8 to 10 hours of Jesus' life. In John chapter 18. So last week we looked at the fact that we saw people who went to great extremes to get what they want, or to try to get Jesus to do what they wanted to do. We looked at Judas and his motivation and what he was doing before Christ to force Jesus maybe into taking the throne. We looked at Peter and his denial of Jesus, and why did he stand up and take a sword out and begin to fight? Right? Because he was trying to block the soldiers from getting to Jesus, because he didn't understand that Jesus had to die. He wanted also, just like Judas, for Jesus to take the throne. And then we saw the Pharisees, and we saw their hearts, and we saw how they went to great extremes, certainly to get what they want, not to get Jesus to do what they wanted to, because what they wanted of Jesus was for him to be out of the picture. They wanted Jesus to be out completely. And so they're willing to go to great lengths to take him out. And so that's what we looked at last week, was his arrest. This week, we want to look at his trial. And it's interesting because the book of John, like we talked about last week, the book of John doesn't necessarily give all the details of the synoptics. There could be several reasons for that. One of them, you realize, is that John was the last gospel written. And so Matthew, Mark, and Luke are already in circulation. Maybe people know. And John's interest is not just to give history, but to show that he is the Christ, the Son of the living God. And so he doesn't always go into all the details. And so we do not see in the Gospel of John the trial before Caiaphas and before the Sanhedrin. and the kangaroo court, as we can call it, because it was only for one purpose, to find any reason they could to say guilty. It was a sham, really, the trial. And so John's interest is not in that. So what he does instead is he goes to Pilate. And we have a great detail, greater than any other of the synoptics, of the other Gospels, the detail of the trial before Pilate. And so what I want to do today is I want to walk through that. I want to give you some history as far as the times and why Pilate did what he did. And then at the end, I want to apply a little bit to us and ask, where do you stand? And who do you stand with this morning? So if you look with me, John chapter 18, starting at verse 28. It says, "Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas into the praetorium," which was just the palace of Pilate, "and it was early. And they themselves did not enter into the praetorium, so that they would not be defiled, but might eat of the Passover." So I'm just eat of the password. We live in an internet age, don't we? Can't get it out of our mind. So they could celebrate the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread after that. The 7 days. So they would not be defiled in any way, so that they could be joined into the festival, because Jewish law said that they would be defiled even if they entered into the house of a Gentile. So, and there's different laws in place about what they touch. Certainly till evening, possibly for 7 days. So there was no way that they were going to miss that. And so they asked Pilate to come out, and that was traditional. Pilate would do that. He understood the custom of the Jews. This is very early in the morning. Probably just after sunrise, and that is not abnormal. As a matter of fact, most Romans would start their work day at sunrise. You realize that they did not have great lights like we have. They didn't have electricity. So often they would start right at sunrise, and they would finish their work day at noon time. So they come before Pilate, and they ask him. Pilate starts off as he would any trial. Verse 29, he says, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" And it's interesting because you begin to sense the tension that is between Pilate and the Pharisees, or Pilate and the Sanhedrin. And there is great tension. What you need to understand about this is that Pilate hated the Jews, and the Jews hated Pilate. The Jews hated Pilate. And Pilate hated the Jews. And yet here they are asking of him. A little history. Pilate took office AD 26. So we'll talk a little bit about how he got into office in a little bit. But he was the governor, the procurator. He was in charge of the whole region of Judah and Samaria. Like I said, he took office in AD 26. He hated the Jews. He didn't like being there. He didn't actually stay in Jerusalem. The only reason why he's in Jerusalem now is because during the High Holy Feasts, he would show up. And that was really because that was a time of great possibility of insurrection. That was the time that the people were gathered, that Jewish pride was at its highest. And if there was going to be revolt, that was the time that it could be. And so he was there to solve any problems. Really, that's the only reason why he was there. He didn't like being in Jerusalem. His power over the Jews was almost absolute. Almost absolute. He had the power to condemn immediately to death, as we see with Jesus. And he... Although the Jews, and although he didn't want uprising, that would look horrible. If he could not control the people, that would look very bad for him. And as a matter of fact, the Jewish region was considered one of the hardest to rule over because of their great religious beliefs. Right? But Pilate really didn't always try to appease them. As a matter of fact, 2 incidences with Pilate show his disdain for them and show his lack of understanding of the religious mindset and his lack of care over that. The first is that he wanted to build an aqueduct to bring water into the city, which is, that's a governmental plan, something that's good. But what he did was, because he said, listen, this is for the Jewish people, they're going to benefit also from it, he took money out of the temple to pay for it. Out of the temple treasury, out of God's money. The people revolted. They would not put up with that. They did not like that. So what Pilate did was, he dressed soldiers as normal citizens in the throngs of people that were gathered in this revolt. And at a certain time he called, and they turned on the people and they cut down many. And so he stopped the revolt. He stopped the rebellion. But obviously the Jews were angered and unhappy about that. The second one, Pilate authorized the image of Caesar to be carried on the flagpoles that the Roman soldiers would carry even into the temple courtyard. They would never go further than the outer court, but they would carry these stanchions in with these emblems of Caesar, who considered himself God. It was idolatry to the Jews. It was idolatry. As a matter of fact, past procurators realized that was not something they should do, and they removed it. They put them back on. Of course, this received Jewish resistance. As a matter of fact, when Pilate threatened to kill them, they refused to move. And they said, you can cut us all down. And it was only seeing how adamant they were that he eventually did back off and took those images off of those. But again, had great disdain for them. So there's this great tension that happens, or that's thick in this trial as these Pharisees bring Jesus before him, and he says, what's your accusation? What do you bring against this man that you have him here? Now, he knows about Jesus. He's heard about Jesus. And yet they're bringing him before. What's your accusation? It's interesting, their answer. Verse 30. He says, if this man was not an evildoer, we would have not delivered him over to you. In other words, we really don't have anything against him that would be against the Roman law necessarily, although they accuse him and they will accuse him, and really Pilate knows why, that maybe he's some sort of insurrectionist. That he's trying to supplant Pilate as God. I mean, not Pilate, but Tiberius, the Caesar at the time, as God, as the emperor. But he kind of knows. And so he says, take him yourself. Verse 31. And judge him according to your law. In other words, he says, listen, if it's really not something that's for me, you take him. You try him. And they say, they bring out what their intentions are. Right? Verse 30. Verse 31. They say, take him yourselves and judge according to the law. The Jews said, we are not permitted to put anyone to death. Their intention is clear. Listen, they're not here for a trial. They're not here because they have an accusation against Jesus, and they really want him judged in a correct way. They want Jesus dead. And they want Jesus dead in a public way. They want Jesus humiliated. They want him crucified. Put up on a cross. They want him shown to the world that he is not God, that he is not the Son of God, that he is but a man, and that he will die. That's what they want. That's all they want from this. And so says, we're not permitted to put anyone to death. Commentary, John says, this is to fulfill the word of Jesus, which he said, signifying by what kind of death he was about to die, that he was about to be lifted up, even like the snake in the desert with Moses, that he was to be lifted up, and that all could look upon him for salvation. So Pilate takes him in. All right, I now know what you want. Let me take him in and let me interrogate this prisoner. Let me find out about this man. So verse 33, we say, therefore Pilate entered again into the praetorium and summoned Jesus and said to him, are you the king of the Jews? Now, it gives insight that Pilate knows exactly what the issue is. You understand that Pilate knows what's going on in Jerusalem. He knew that just 5-6 days earlier, Jesus had entered into Jerusalem on a donkey to the cries of the people, Hosanna, Hosanna, which means save us. He knew who he was. As a matter of fact, there was no doubt that Pilate had him watched. Which is why, I don't know if Pilate knew that the soldiers went to arrest Jesus with the temple guard, but if he did, he understood because of Jesus' popularity there. Now, there's very well he might not have known. All right? But because of the popularity of Christ, and because of all that was happening, they knew that they hailed, that the people were hailing him as the Messiah, as the King. And so he says, are you the King of the Jews? Jesus answered, are you saying this on your own initiative? In other words, do you really want to know, Pilate? Are you really seeking truth here? He says, or did others tell you about me? Pilate answered, I'm not a Jew, am I? Your own nation, your chief priest delivered you to me. What have you done? In other words, what's the deal? Why would they be this upset at you that they would really hand you over to be killed, to be crucified? Jesus says, verse 36, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm. Basically, Jesus is saying, yes, I was born a king. I was not appointed. I did not usurp any thrones to get there. I came into the world to be a king. But listen, I'm a king, but I'm not trying to be a king, earthly king. I'm a heavenly king. He says, Pilate says to him, so you are a king. He says, you say correctly that I'm a king. For this I have been born. I've been born into this world. And for this I have come into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who is of truth hears my voice. So again, he says, my task is to witness to the truth. My task is to bring the truth. I am a king, but I was born a king. I was born a king. And that's who I am. Pilate, gives that famous answer, verse 38, says, what is truth? But he doesn't wait for an answer. He doesn't really want an answer. See, at this point, what Pilate is looking at Jesus as is kind of like a philosopher. Lots of philosophers think they had the answer to everything. Lots of philosophers might even think of themselves as better able to rule. But they were not political. They were not out for political gain. They were not out for political rule. And so it says, verse 38, when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, I find no guilt in him. In other words, he's not out to usurp Rome. He's not out to look for political gain. He's not trying to gain the kingdom here. So he attempts to release him. I like what the InterVarsity Press Bible commentary says. He says, Roman law prohibited treason, not wandering antisocial philosophers. From Pilate's Roman perspective, he had no reason to condemn Jesus. He had no reason to condemn Jesus. Jesus wasn't a threat to Rome. He was a threat to the Jews. He was a threat to the Pharisees because people were turning against him. Right? He was a threat to them, but not a threat to Rome. It's almost like a Christmas tune. Look what it's. Luke chapter 23 says this as we go back to the synopsis.
He said, Pilate summoned the chief priests and the rulers of the people, and he said to them, "You brought this man to me as one who incites the people to rebellion. And behold, having examined him before you, I have not found no guilt in this man regarding the charges that you make against him. Nor has Herod." What he had done is, during this time he had Jesus, he said, "Oh, I find out where you are. You're from the Samaria area." He sends him to Herod. Herod just wants to see a trick from Jesus. This is not what he does. Jesus doesn't say anything before Herod. He brings him back. He says, "Listen, there's nothing there to find." He says, "And behold, nothing deserving death has been done by him." Nothing deserving death. He's not a man out for the kingdom. There's nothing deserving death. As a matter of fact, it tells us in Matthew chapter 27, verse 18, that he had a little insight on him. He said, "For he knew that because of envy, they had handed him over." That's a Pilate knew. He disdained these people. He knew, but he could see right through them. For this guy, for this guy Jesus, he knew that Jesus had no threat against his kingdom, no threat against the kingdom of Rome, but it was a threat against their kingdom, if you will. And he knew that that Jesus was gaining in popularity, and he knew that the Pharisees were envious of Jesus, were jealous of Jesus, and wanted him out of the picture. Wanted him out of the picture. So he goes out and he says, "I find no guilt in him." Verse 39. He kind of takes it. He wants to use it for his advantage. He says, "Oh, but you know what? You have a custom that I release some of you, or someone for you at the Passover. Do you wish that I release for you the King of the Jews?" In other words, what's he saying to them? Listen, he's not a threat to our kingdom. If his claim is anything, it's king over you guys. So, you know what? I could kill two birds with one stone. I need to release Jesus because, listen, he hadn't done anything wrong. But you guys, this is your king. So why don't you take him? You take him back. You do what you want with him. But look at their reaction. Verse 40. So they cried out again, saying, "Not this man, but Barabbas." It says, now Barabbas was a robber. What's interesting is that a robber, in the sense, the word there in the Greek really means really an insurrectionist. He is an insurrectionist. He is one that probably has been arrested during the feast because he has tried to start riots. He has tried to rile up Jerusalem in an insurrection. He is the one who is the real threat to Rome. If he's any threat at all, but he's the one who's trying to do that. So what he does is this: is he takes Jesus and he punishes him. Now you might wonder, why would he punish them? Look at chapter 19, verse 1. It says, Then Pilate then took Jesus and scourged him. So Pilate sends Jesus away. Listen, he absolutely wants to teach Jesus a lesson. Again, Pilate has no regard for any Jew, and this is a Jew that has the popularity of the Jews. And so he wants to make sure that Jesus understands that he is under his control. And so he punishes him with scourging. We made a big deal about that in history, and it is a big deal. Roman scourging, historians would tell us, could be horrific. As a matter of fact, it was considered way too low for any Roman citizen. A Roman citizen would never be hung on a cross. It was against the law for a Roman citizen. They considered it beneath them to do that. Scourging was used in two ways in Rome. It was used to punish those outside of the realm, those people who needed to be punished. For their own people, they would beat them with rods. For those outside the kingdom, they would scourge them. And the scourging was a whip made of leather talons, several of them that had bits of bone in them. You probably have heard, or some of you may have heard, the truth that history would tell us that those who are very good at it, they would have bones, bits of bones, and some of them would have balls of metal at the end. So when they hit, they would bruise, and then the bone would rip. And a very good one who could scourge, their history has told us in some instances where they would show the ribs, actually the bones, and some would even could, if you were really good, could take it so much that the entrails would actually come out. Now that probably did not happen to Jesus. You need to know that. As a matter of fact, Jesus probably endured a softer scourging than what would normally be found even for a crucifixion, because Pilate's desire was not to kill him. His desire was not to kill him. His desire was to punish him. And so there's absolutely no doubt that Jesus went into the scourging and walked away with tremendous pain, with a loss of blood, in horrific pain because of the scars on the back, but not in a place where he could have died at that point. All right, now, is that important? Well, only to the sense that Pilate didn't desire for him to die. Pilate's was, I'm going to punish him, I'm going to show him a lesson on my own, and then I'm going to release him to the people. And so it's interesting what he does, and this is why I think he wants to show him a lesson. Look at what happens. It says the soldiers even twisted a crown of thorns and put it on his head and put a purple robe on him, and we're told that when he comes back from Herod, Herod had put a purple robe on him, so it's probably the same robe that Herod had, but they go a little bit further, and they put a crown of thorns on his head. That was something that happened often when they were mocking people. As a matter of fact, people would do that at times to even mock kings, where they would dress them up and they would mock them in that way. And so Jesus was being mocked by the soldiers. And they came up to him and they said, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they gave him slaps in the face. And Pilate came out again and said to them, "Behold, I'm bringing him out to you so that you may know that I find no guilt in him." And then Jesus then came out wearing a crown of thorns and a purple robe, and Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." What's Pilate saying there? Pilate is saying, listen, this is no king, and this is no God. This is a man. Look at it. He's humiliated. He's beaten. He's bleeding. He is under my control. He is absolutely of no threat. And he is absolutely no God. That's exactly what Pilate is saying about it. So they send him out. He says, "Here's the man." He says, "So when the chief priest and the officials saw him, they cried out, 'Crucify, crucify!' And Pilate said to them, 'Take him yourself and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him.' The Jews answered, 'We have a law, and by that law he ought to die because he made himself out to be the Son of God.' So, therefore, when Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. And he entered the praetorium again and said to Jesus, 'Where are you from?' But Jesus gave him no answer. Pilate said to him, 'Do you not speak to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you? And I have authority to crucify you?' Jesus answered and said, 'You have no authority over me unless I have given it to you, unless it had been given to you from above. For this reason, he who delivered me to you has the greater sin.'" They bring him out. They want to crucify him. He brings them back in. They say, listen, he claims to be a God. And so Pilate, takes the thought. They had believed in many gods at that point, and he just wants to make sure one more time. And so he pulls him back in and he says, "Wait a second. Where are you from, Jesus? Where are you from?" And Jesus doesn't give him an answer. And, like we said, Pilate says, "Listen, I have power over you. I can crucify you. I can release you." And Jesus declares to him, "Listen, you can do nothing except that God has given you the power to do that." You presume to judge me, but you have no power over me. You presume to judge me, but you have no power over me. It's only because you've been given authority. So it says in verse 12, as a result of this, Pilate made efforts to release him. But the Jews cried out, saying, if you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself out to be king opposes Caesar. It says, therefore, when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out, sat it down on the judgment seat at a place called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. It says, now it was the day of preparation for the Passover. It was the 6th hour, and he said to the Jews, behold your king. And they cried out, away from him, away with him. Away with him, crucify him. Pilate said, shall I crucify your king? And we said, we have no king but Caesar. Verse 16, so he handed him over to be crucified. Why does Pilate back down? Did you ever wonder that? Did you ever wonder why Pilate backs down? It's an interesting study in history. I told you Pilate became procurator of the Judean province in AD 26. He was assigned there not by Tiberius. Tiberius was the Caesar at the time. He was assigned instead by a man named Sejanus. Sejanus had, Tiberius was a funny critter. He was a funny Caesar. As a matter of fact, by this point, by this trial point, Tiberius had put himself away on an island sanctuary. Really, it never came to Rome. Sejanus was his man in control. As a matter of fact, Sejanus was in control of every other aspect of his kingdom. He controlled all information that went to Tiberius, and all the senators of Rome treated him as if he was the Caesar. Not that he ever claimed to be, because he didn't. But he had that kind of power. Sejanus hated the Jews. History tells us that there were many times that he incited things against the Jews. And so he is the